This is National Chess Master Rats at chess.com. I'm analyzing a game submitted by Jason Gillard. This is for my member Post Their Best Games thread, and any game will do. You get a free video from me as long as the thread stays open. Anyway, this was played at a time control of 90 minutes plus a 30-second increment for every move. And this is an excellent time control to play on. You're playing true tournament chess. I grew up accustomed to playing time controls like 40 moves in 90 minutes or 40 moves in 100 minutes and then 25 moves an hour thereafter. It's good to have these time controls because you're thinking. The old international time control they used to play world championship matches in was 40 moves in 2.5 hours for both sides. Then they would adjourn and after 5 hours of play and come back and play 16 moves an hour. And that's how these title players earn their titles, playing long time control games. They don't earn them by playing speed chess on the internet. Okay, so stay away from speed; it kills. All right, now where can you play games of this time control? Well, try your local chess club. There should be one somewhere near where you live. Weekend tournaments or online. Now here in my group, my video lessons group, we have a thread. You can post your information. When you can play, on your times, what time zone you're in, what your rating is, what time controls you prefer, and people can message you, or you can see the list of people we have and find one there and set up a game or two, because these are good practice for you. Okay, and 90-30 is a great time control to play. Okay, because it's more accustomed to the type of tournament game you'll be playing when you go out in the real world. Real world. That's a real tongue twister. Okay, so let's get down to the nitty gritty. In other words, this game. Let's see what happens. Okay, Jason made some comments. I'll address them when we get to them in the games or in the score of the game. It's a Slav defense. The Queen's Gambit declined. And at this point, I think Black commits kind of a minor strategic error. Okay, now what he did was okay. All right, usually moves that you select in the opening are okay. Usually, unless you're not developing. It's just there's reasons for it. And I'll explain it. How would you recapture? You have two ways to recapture, with the knight or the pawn. Well, I believe the better way to retake is with the pawn. And the reason is you're maintaining a share of the center, okay? You're keeping a pawn in the center. Also, for those that are familiar with the Queen's Gambit declined exchange variation, that's when Black is not playing the Slav, he's playing e6. White will make this exchange on d5 before Black has an opportunity to play c6, because then Black may very well opt to capture on d5 with his pawn. And that takes away the minority attack. Now, what's the minority attack, you ask? Well, it's beyond the scope of this video, but it's safe to say that I've addressed it in Team 45 League games, which are available on my website. Give you the whole strategies behind it. Anyway, the game essentially is even from this point, and both sides just continue your development. And there's a principle I want to address here, just simply because it comes up. When you have a locked pawn structure like this, I'm going to give you an answer to a question that will come up many times, and we're going to address it real simply. Let me uncolor those pawns in just a second. Okay. When it comes to exchanges, eventually bishops are going to may oppose each other, and an exchange is possible. Now, from this position, if you're going to trade bishops, which color squared bishop should both sides strive to keep, and which side should they strive to exchange? And the answer is given right here, so you'll never have to worry about it again. Okay? You want to trade the bishop, your bishop that's on the color of your pawn. In other words, Black would like to trade this bishop off, and White would like to trade this bishop off. There's the answer. Now, why, you ask? Well, here's why. This pawn gets in the way of the the white bishop that moves on black squares, and vice versa for this one. It could be having to defend that pawn. You don't want your pieces defending. You want your pieces attacking. And conversely, your opposing bishop could be attacking that pawn, not defending. You have greater mobility around it. So there's your answer in a nutshell. Now there'll be exceptions when you don't want to trade it off, but when you think about the possibility of a late middle gamer ending, if you can have your pieces attacking while your opponents are defending, that's not a bad thing at all. As a matter of fact, it's a very good thing. Okay? So there's your answer to that question that you didn't even ask. But you'll see it come up. Now you know what to do. Okay. So let's see. But essentially, it's better to take here just to maintain all the balances of the position. With the C file opened up, black has secured full equality. Now, as I say, knight taking here is not a bad move. Okay, I just don't think it's the best move, and it's moving that piece a second time, and white may not opt to capture it, and we'll see why. It's better for black to maintain a pawn in the center. Okay, so now queen b3 comes in. Now we've got some pressure on b7, so we can't play queen c7 here. We're going to drop a pawn to knight takes. Okay. Yeah, we are. Queen a5 check is no good. Knight just comes back to c3. Okay. So this happens a lot in this type of symmetrical position. We see a chance to trade queens, and one side gets a double pawn. And often what happens is those queens will sit there for a move or two or longer before one side finally says, "Okay, I'll take your queen." It's not bad to get double pawns. You know, we're conditioned not to get double pawns from day one when we're learning strategy, but it's not a bad thing. And let me illustrate. White decides to take. Now, black could opt to take with this pawn, and this is not a bad move. And it's even possible that white can now take this knight and say, "Look, you got two crummy pawns." Well, in compensation for those two crummy pawns, black has an open file. White will at some point will have to stop and spend a move with pawn to a3 to keep that pawn safe. Okay? And how does white get at these pawns? Well, if black develops carefully, the answer is he won't. Okay? So this rook has a bit of mobility, which is certainly not a bad thing to have. And they could become a weakness, but chances are they're not. Okay, and when one comes up to a3, eventually we're going to be able to probably work out a strategy where we can move that pawn up to b4 and liquidate ourselves of the double pawn. And if black can get rid of both queenside pawns, the game is probably going to evaporate into a drawn position, because it's tough to win when all your pawns are on one side of the board when you reach an ending. Okay, so it's not a bad thing to accept double pawns. But what black did is not bad. Black chose to take with the knight. Now this avoids the double pawns. Okay, and let's see what happens. Okay, but here's the drawback with the strategy. Okay, now white has gotten control of the center. Okay, now see, there was a comment that white made earlier. He knows that he can get e4 in, and he just has to make sure it's not going to be a fork. But anyway, the comment's not that important. Anyway, but white has gained something here simply because he has control of the center now. But black had prepared for this, and he comes back with bishop g6, and here white goes into a strategy which black has prepared for. What white does is he wants to trade off the knight for the bishop. Okay, now we're instructed a lot from day one that a knight is better than a bishop. Well, it depends on the position. And one thing about going out to acquire a bishop pair is that you take some tempos to do it. Okay, and the other side that accepts the 2 knights, usually gets quick development, which is often enough compensation. And we'll talk about it in a moment, what this entails when we actually go into this. What white's going to play is knight e5 and trade this bishop off. But let's just consider for a moment what's an alternative plan. Well, if you watch my videos, you know what I'm going to say. Develop, okay? Develop a piece. Nothing wrong with developing a piece. Nothing ever wrong with developing a piece. Okay? So just play bishop e2. Boom. That develops a piece. Now white has 3 minor pieces developed. He's ready to castle. This bishop is ready to develop, and black's going to go about his business and do the same thing. So I'll just give you a possible line. e6. Hey, let's castle. That's a developing move. Now suppose white wants to make a threat. Black wants to make a threat. Bishop b4. Wow, we gotta watch out. There's something loose here. How are we going to deal with that? Deal with it a lot of ways. Let's see. One is to push the pawn. Okay. Although that gives a hole on d5. But because white is getting developed, it's not so bad. If white was still sitting with his bishop back on f1 and his king on e1, black's going to get a pretty active game here. So I'll just show you. Let's suppose black opts to saddle white with some weak pawns, voluntarily giving up the bishop pair to occupy this square. Well, white should be okay here. Look, he's getting developed. Okay. Black still has to castle, develop his queen knight. White's development is complete. The only thing not developed is this rook, and that's going to change. Now we can't put it on the open file; it's going to get snatched. But white's picked up the bishop pair, and black doesn't have enough compensation here in sake of development for giving up the bishops, and white will eventually get a c4 in and maybe break with d5 soon enough. But anyway, that's beyond the scope of this text. But it's just the point I'm trying to make is, when you develop your pieces, good things are going to happen, and the moves will be waiting to be found. So by white jumping to acquire the bishop pair, white gives something up. He gives up development. Okay, it's a concession that I mentioned. Often the bishop pair is acquired at loss of time, loss of tempos. Okay, so here his note is he expected it. He had been practicing this variation of the Slav and was ready for the light squared bishop capture, and he'll recapture the h-pawn, getting an open file. Now we have the same thing on the other side of the board, and we'll talk about that when it happens. Okay, whoops. So black's prepared for it. So white's taking time to make this capture. What does black do? Well, black should develop. Now here white makes, I believe, not a good move. Now it's not a bad move in sense that black can step in and take advantage of it right now. It'll become apparent how black could have taken advantage of it when we reach the key phase of this game down the line. But white picks up a faulty strategy here. Again, it's not a thing that's going to mess you up. White's also saying, I've got a 450 rating point advantage over my opponent. I expect to win this game. Sometimes you can be when you're playing somebody much higher than you, they'll be overconfident. And if you work, you can often find games. Now here, black's already indicated he prepared in advance, which is good. Plus, black is ready to get an upset if he can get it. And white's in for a little surprise. So the lesson here is that you have to take everybody seriously. But here white makes, like I say, not a good move. Again, not enough to mess him up. He plays the pawn to f3. Now, what's wrong with it? Okay, well, there's several things wrong with it. Number one, he's setting up a position where his light squared bishop's mobility is reduced. That bishop could go to e2, which is a developing move, something I played earlier, and it can go to f3 to support an eventual d5 pawn break. Okay? So bishop e2 develops, prepares to castle. There's nothing wrong with it. White is overprotecting e4. It's already guarded. Okay? How are you going to take advantage of that? Well, you want to play bishop b4? Now you're threatening to play bishop takes e4. Well, then white just does what he... Whoops. Come back here. White just does what he set out to do. Take the bishop off. Now when he takes the bishop off, e4 is safe and secure. And white is further along in his development as a result. So f3 was a problem. It's going to create some nuisances for white to deal with a little bit because it weakens his kingside pawn structure. Okay, but f3, and then here black made a mistake. I think there was a better move. Nothing wrong with the move he played. Usually they're in the opening. There's a lot of reasonable moves, but sometimes there's the best move just waiting to be played. Okay, what black played is a developing move. We can't fault it for that. He's going to play knight bd7, but there was a better move, and the better move is bishop d6. Okay, now what does this do, and why is this a better move? Okay, white's committed to capturing that bishop, so let's look at it. Let's consider if white actually wants to do that. Okay, there's an immediate threat. There's an immediate threat on h2. Black's piled up on it. Black's even threatening to stop and give a check first on g6, relying on the pin to displace the white king so that it can't castle. How does white deal with this? If he pushes his pawn to h4, black can just take it. Rook takes h4, and after rook takes, bishop check, picking the rook back. Or black could do it the other way. He could check with the bishop first and then pick up the pawn. It's a happy choice. If h3, just take away castling privileges. g3 doesn't work because bishop takes pawn check. So white's having trouble defending that pawn. If he plays f4, that stops it. But then he's shut this bishop in now and admitted his mistake and that pawn to f3 was no good. And if white plays e5, suddenly there's a hole on d5 for black to occupy. Okay, so what's white's alternative? Let's talk about it for a second. Well, what's another candidate move? What do we do? Well, I'll say it again. I like to keep saying it this way. If you're looking for candidate moves, pick developing moves. You got to get developed. So here, let's try bishop e2. Now, if black so chooses, black can take this. And even though this bishop doesn't have a whole lot of scope, we'll get it into play eventually. Its counterpart is weak. It's behind a wall of pawns. But black's achieved one thing out of this. A queenside pawn majority. We can assume that both sides will castle kingside. Now, they don't have to, but the reason I say is for purpose of illustration. When both sides have castled, an outside on kingside, an outside queenside pawn majority leads to winning chances. Now, I've seen some text I read when I was a kid that said it leads to a clear advantage. Well, it actually doesn't, but it leads to winning chances because you will eventually get an outside pass pawn. And if you can tie your opponent's king or rook or minor piece, whatever kind of ending you are in, down to keeping an eye on that pawn, it gives you chances to infiltrate on another side, another part of the board, and make another weakness and finally win something. Okay, so suddenly black has potential winning chances right out of the opening. Also, e5 is weak. Okay, it's black's move. He'll develop a piece and attack it. Now, how's white going to deal with that? Well, he can guard it. He can put his bishop here. Now he's defending. This bishop's defending a pawn. Okay, but at least he developed a piece, or he can play f4, and now e4 is a little weaker. It's tricky. But I think bishop d6 was a more versatile move, other than what he did with. But again, it's not a bad move. Okay, it isn't, because it now tells white to go ahead and do what you're going to do. But now black no longer has those tricks that he did with the bishop on d6, and white's able to play a move that he couldn't play in those variations, and that's bishop f4, taking that diagonal before black does. So that's the difference. So what black does is fine. He continues his development, and here white castles queenside, and Jason makes a comment. I think this was an error, and his king is exposed, and with the knight on c3 as protection, I just found my long-term target for the game. Now, a lot of people will look at this and say, well, there's no queens. He's not going to attack me. Well, you'll be surprised. Black does attack white here. Okay, so there's ways to do it, and black knew right now what he was going to try to do. So what's a better move other than castling queenside? Well, develop. Castle kingside. Bishop e2. Get ready to castle. Or if anything, just put the king on f2. Okay, he's a tempo closer. Then you're connecting your rooks. See, white's still got two guys that have not developed. They're not doing anything back there at all, and they're reducing options. Okay, so castling queenside was an error, and some people, they don't think that king's in trouble. Well, I can tell you from experience, it can be. Okay, it's exposed. Black's not going to attack the king if it castles on the king side. Okay, he's not. All right. So anyway, all black needs to do to complete his development is castle and develop his queen rook. White still has to develop his king bishop and his king rook, and neither one seems to have any effective mobility. Where does this bishop go? It can't go to a6. It can't go to b5. It can't go to c4. It can go to d3. It can go to e2. Then where does it go? Well, it doesn't. Maybe d3, we maneuver it to c2, and then to b3. That takes a while. But it's an idea if white wants to try to break for d5, which is what white's going to try to do. But it's black's move, and black finds a good move here, g5. Hey, I'm going to advance my pawns, and I'm going to attack you. I'm going to grab a little space. And eventually, black can get rid of the double pawn. So the bishop comes back to g3. And as knight comes out, now white finally develops the bishop. And black chases the bishop back. So here's white preserving his bishops, but he's doing so at loss of time. Now those bishops don't have a lot of mobility still. The only way they're going to get mobility is if the center opens up, and then they'll have plenty of it. So that should be white's strategy, and that's what he does. He tries to play for a break of pawn to d5. So black castles queenside here, which is perfectly good. It gets the rook on the center file in a hurry, but castling kingside would have been fine too, and then plant one rook on the c file and one on the d file, and maybe, as we'll see later, it might have been better, maybe not. We'll maybe discuss it when we see what happens. Okay, so white's comment is both rooks on open files, creating as much pressure for him to defend as I can. He will bust through at d5 at some point. So this is. And actually, well, we'll get to it. There was a way to prevent that, and we'll see when we get there. I'll probably show it after we finish the game. Okay, so white decides he doesn't want this knight to have this decent-looking square, so white prevents it with g3. Now, those pawns look solid, but in a way, they're not helping white at all. They're cutting down his bishop's mobility, okay? And this pawn on f3 is now weak. You know, they were all fine when they were back on the original squares, but now there's some weaknesses. So we'll see how this comes up in a little bit. So black, how that can take play in a little bit. Black transfers his king over so that he can get on the c file. It might not have been a bad idea for white to play king b1, but what white does is fine. He develops a rook, and then he says all this pawn is gunning for the down the d file and the e file for the d5 breakthrough. Okay, so black brings his pieces back over the king to the center. Knight f6, which has a discovered attack on h2, so white needs to stop and deal with that. But look at how passive that bishop is. Until white breaks d5, it's just watching. Okay? So white can't afford to just give that pawn up for nothing. He doesn't have any counterplay. The alternative was maybe to attack this pawn, but you know, that just helps black, gets rid of his double pawn. Black will just take this and have command of the open file and a rook on the 7th. So bishop g1. Okay, now it's black's turn, and white drops his other bishop back. Now look at this. White's got his rooks in the game. They're centralized, but almost everything he owns is on the back rank. And one thing white still has, though, he still has that imposing pawn center. And he's getting ready to break d5, and it's going to happen. Now, there was a way to stop it, and I'll show you here in a little bit. But black redeploys. He wants to get some new squares. I'm trying to reroute the knight off the edge of the edge into the center somehow. Okay, so this is fine. It's a plan. Now a3, and this is kind of a weakening move too. It creates some weaknesses around the king position, and these will become apparent in a moment. And here I believe black had a great move, and I'm going to come back and share it at the end. But black had a plan, and we'll see more as we get there. Okay, so here comes the break, d5, and his comment, there it is, d5, but e5 is weak, and now the poor a3 move has further weakened his king. So black activates his knight, and in principle this is good. The knight now occupies e5, and this has a gain of tempo. It's attacking this pawn, threatening to take it. White needs to deal with that. Boom. There's got to get that bishop further out of play. And now black wants to get the rook on the c file, so he takes this way. It might have been better to take the other way, but we'll come back. We're not going to come back to that because I'll show you a better idea here in a little bit when we get to the conclusion of the game. But here comes the point where black conducts a tactical motive, and I have to give black a lot of credit for conducting what he did. Now, as it turns out, it's going to be flawed. Okay. Now, white didn't uncover, or black didn't uncover what was wrong with it, and I will show what's wrong with it. But we want to stop and talk about how we can find stuff like this and how we can accurately assess continuations. Okay. Now, anytime you make a forcing move, for instance, a capture or a threat or a check, it limits your opponent's options. Okay? In other words, he's got to deal with it. Okay? There are several ways to deal with threats, captures, and checks, but it does reduce what you have to look at. Now, we're humans. We're not machines. we have to analyze from what we can see. And when you analyze forcing moves, it's pretty easy to go several moves deep, even if you're low rated. You can do it. You have time on the clock. You can sit down and calculate. Now, black would have had to see a lot from this position in order to accurately assess this. Black doesn't play this correctly. His combination is flawed, and white missed a win. But still, I'm going to give credit for black for finding it. And let's see what black does and how could we avoid it. But you're going to have to, black's going to have to see everything from this point. And here's the move, something black's been trying for a while. Now, if you're white, you're looking at this and saying, wow, look at this, I'm going to win a pawn. And I don't know how much time white spent on the game, but this takes a pawn, and it puts a threat on d6. And then if that bishop falls, then nothing's protecting this knight. And here he says, and here he suddenly got too greedy and left himself open to a pin crossfire. Well, actually, you know, unfortunately, your combination was flawed, and I'll show you why. But it's a relatively easy combination to see if you understand tactics. Okay, this pawn is overworked. It's guarding 2 squares. Okay, so we're going to eliminate the defender, and what black comes up with is this move: bishop takes a3, and it's easy to see if you can consider that move, that if pawn takes, that you pick up the knight with check, and you have to see one more move. Okay, I'll show you. You pick up the knight with check, and you have to ask yourself, well, what if his king comes up and attacks my rook? My rook's under attack and my knight's under attack. Well, then you stop and you see this move, knight check, driving the king away from this rook. We'll pick a2, and now black is free to go grab a pawn. Now, white has some counterplay here, and I'm not exactly sure if this is okay for black. That's one drawback, another fly in the ointment of this combination, is that this whole thing is predicated that black wins material and white can't do anything with that passed pawn that he's about to get. Black would have to actually make sure e7 and e takes f7 don't suddenly give white a winning position. So it might be too risky to grab that pawn on f3. Maybe what black needs to do is play f6 and figure we'll surround and win that pawn later. I'll leave this to white to analyze. Maybe he has the answers. Whoops. But let's back up. But that pawn could get very dangerous in a hurry, and we're going to see why in a moment. Okay, so, oops, I'm going forward instead of back. Let's back it up. So, unfortunately, though, this move is flawed. Now, there's a lot of ways to accurately analyze. And there's a lot of ways, just as many ways, if not more, to inaccurately analyze. Now, how can we solve one and solve so we don't misanalyze and accurately analyze all in one swoop? Well, there are several ways to do it. First off, we have to be able to see this combination. Okay, and it comes down to one thing we talk about in chess. I can't do that. You know, a lot of people wouldn't say, I can't take that pawn, because if I take that pawn, I lose my bishop. But you look one move further. Okay, if he takes my bishop, nothing is guarding the knight on c3. I take it with check. So every time you make a move, I've talked about in my program, you want to always be considering candidate moves. And at the same time, you also have to consider when I make a candidate move, what can my opponent do in reply? Okay? So I've come up with my own approach on this. It's not as complicated. Oh, there goes my connection. Oh, it's back. It's not as complicated as it sounds. I call it the 3C approach. That's the letter C. And more specifically, abbreviate them can, and can. 3 cans. Think of the can, the dance. If you can remember the tune, you'll never forget it. You want to look for 3 things. Candidate moves. Okay, what are the candidate moves? What if I don't play this, what else can I do? The other thing is, what can't I do? Well, we've solved that. You know, we say to ourselves that we can't play that move because it drops a bishop, but then we realize we can play it. So you want to look at the can't moves and discover you can play them, and evaluate them with analysis rather than just stopping right there. So, oh, I can't take that. And the third thing is, what can my opponent do in retaliation? And now, I believe this is the complete approach if you take this every game, because number 1, you're always going to consider candidate moves. Number 2, you're always going to consider moves you don't think you can play. And number 3, you're always going to consider moves that your opponent can do. Now, when you're thinking what's your opponent do, you have to consider forcing moves. Okay, and as I say, because forcing moves are easy to analyze, and anyone can, like I just said, they can see if pawn takes bishop, you play rook takes knight check. The only fly in the ointment is how to deal with this pawn on e6, and I think my f6 ideal will probably work. Then just surround and win that pawn later. Okay, but now, for instance, Dan Heisman, the teacher here at chess.com, he has an excellent way to tell you what to do here. When you make a move, consider what your opponent can do. And the 3 key things that'll mess you up are a threat of his, a capture of his, or a check. Threats, captures, and checks. And this all falls under the third can. What can my opponent do? So this takes Dan's excellent approach and goes one step deeper, because you're always going to be analyzing moves you can't play, and you're always going to make sure you're going to choose among candidate moves and evaluate them and pick the best one. So we got the best of all worlds by doing the can approach. Candidate move, what can't I do, what can he do? So, does White have a check here? No, he doesn't. Okay. Does he have a capture here? Yes, he does. For instance, we already analyzed this one. He also has another one over here. Bishop takes here. Well, that may not do much for him. But White does have a threat. And the best offense, or let me rephrase it, the best defense is often an offense. Okay. The other capture White has is rook takes e5. And he played that, and that should still win. But there was a better move in this position, where you're defending and attacking at the same time. And White to play wins with simply bishop d4. And this is a beautiful move. The threat is now to take this bishop, because we have guarded the knight on c3 with the bishop. And the other threat is to take this knight. Black has 2 pieces loose, and he's going to lose one. And White will win this position. It's just that simple. Okay? So White missed that move. Anyway, let's see what he did play. And White, there's a comment. It says, free knight, not quite. Well, actually, it's a little trickier, but White will still win this, and we'll see. We'll see. Okay, so it's not free for the moment. There's a got the wrong position. Hit the wrong thing. No, that's not it. It's one problem with this chess.com interface. When you play a sideline, it replaces the main line with your sideline, and it gets hard to find the main line. And I apologize. I've got to reload, as I have to do many times. Let's get to the key point. Not too far back. Okay. Okay, there's the move that Black plays. So it's a relatively easy move for White to have seen. He probably had to see it. Okay, now King B1. And now white does have some threats. Okay, pawn takes rook being one of them. So we've got to deal with that, and black deals with this way. And here's the point where white missed a win. Black simply does not have enough, and it all comes back to what I said earlier. The fly in the ointment, the danger in this pawn. If black takes this pawn here, or I'm sorry, if white takes this pawn here, black's in trouble. He's going to lose. Let's see what happens. The threat is to play rook check, and we're going to get a new queen here. Okay, that's the threat. So what can black do? Well, let's stop and give a check, and then park the king over here out of danger. And black doesn't have a follow-up. Only if you could get this knight to c3, then there'd be a mate, but there's just not enough time. How do you stop? How do you stop this from coming in? Rook e8. I don't know. You can bring the rook back to c2. Let's have a look at this. And that's a dangerous pass pawn. Very, very, very dangerous. I think that the black. Let's see. There's probably several ways to do this. You have to do it accurately. Might be able to do it with rook e1. Then we're threatening to take on h8 and bring the rook down. I think black's in a little bit of a quandary here. What to do? You obviously can't take on e8. There's a new queen made, and as I say, the threat is to play rook takes h8 and make a new queen. So what does black do? Well, maybe he shoves this out of the way. Well, this is an awful dangerous pawn, and suddenly these bishops are getting in this game where and black is all tied up. His rook on c8 is pinned. It has no move without losing material. You know, we can just play f4 and go about our business, and the extra pawns that black has on the queen side are really doing no good. And white's got 2 extra pawns on the king side. So there's really, I mean, there's other possibilities too. But how do you stop rook e8? The answer is you don't. So white missed it. Okay. So what white did was, I'm going to back up. White didn't take on f7. White played king a2. And this basically just gave him a lost game. So the question is, when black played rook c8, he committed going into this line. That's an awful lot to ask to see. And it's an awful lot to ask a player with a 1321 rating to see all this. Now, if you're playing this is an online game where you have hours to sit down and work out the variations on a real chess set, you would find that white has a defense if you analyze deeply enough, and you would reject it and start looking for another candidate move. But let's see what happens. We'll finish this game off. Now you can't take the bishop on a3 because knight c4 check, and the rook on e5 falls, and we keep the rook on b2. And now black just takes this off, and white's only chance was to play bishop or pawn to e7, but it didn't matter. He played e takes, and then this bishop check came in, winning this rook, and game over. Okay, so let's talk about a couple things. Let's back it up. Let's back it up to the key point. The key point was when black played rook c8. Again, you're having to ask black to see a lot to solve this. And even though he didn't analyze it accurately, neither did his opponent. And what does this show you? It shows you that both sides have failed to analyze correctly. They've neglected some of the basic rules. They haven't analyzed accurately. They haven't examined all the candidate moves, and they've allowed some of these "you can't do that" moves. So both sides were misfiring. But it happens. It happens on this rating level. What did I say in video lesson 1? Depending on what rating you're at, the more mistakes you make. You're going to make them. But more importantly, your opponent's going to make them. And you want to capitalize on your opponent's mistakes. Cut yours down so that you don't make them. Now, how can black avoid making a mistake here? Well, I've given some strategies at various points. To take on d5 with the pawn, not to take with the piece. Then white doesn't have the pawn center. Okay? What could white do differently? Develop instead of setting up his pawns like he did on the king side. So these are things that you can correct, and then you'll have better positions because more options are going to come up. I mean, the beautiful thing is, I've sat and played take-back chess with students where if they don't like a move, we go back and they play another one. But eventually, they're making a little mistake here and a little mistake here, and I don't do anything special. I don't do anything out of the ordinary. No magic, no brilliant combination that, it would take an hour to find. Nothing at all. All I do is develop my pieces while they're getting theirs activated. That's all I do. I just develop. And because they don't develop, all kinds of things come up. All kinds of ways to win these games quickly come up. And there's no secret to it at all. As long as you develop, good things are going to happen. And when you don't, good things are less likely to happen. Then you get these long struggles on your hands that are very difficult to win. Okay, let's back up. Just a moment. Okay. So it seems that the black strategy was faulty. What did he need to do? Well, you might want to take this with the knight. Okay? That way you avoid possible double pawns and this knight being very active on d5. Here, do I need to show that? Oh, why not? Okay. If you take with the pawn, you could get this Zwischenzug, expecting to take here, but it becomes an in-between move. And now white has this dominating knight on e5, okay? On d5, rather, okay? So you might want to avoid that possibility. Here we looked at something they could do other than the normal thing. A can't move. No, he has to take on d5. No, he doesn't. He can take on b6. We're just expecting him to take. So let's take with the piece and avoid that. And we have to deal with the threat of rook takes d6 followed by rook takes e5. So let's try this. And I think that white's a little bit better here now after the dust is cleared. The reason being the position is opened up somewhat, and those bishops are going to have some influence, okay? It's still close to even, but white's finally making some progress. He's gotten away with his strategy. So if black was fully equal and now has a slight disadvantage, where did black go wrong? He had to do something wrong. It looked like he was making all the right choices. Well, here I'll show you what I've discovered. It's a more advanced strategy, but it's an easy strategy to learn, no matter what your rating is. Okay. Okay. At this point, okay, black had the idea that he was going to try to attack the white king, and as I said, he did. But there's a good move here, but you have to understand the dynamics of this position, what it calls for to do it. Okay, the move to play is bishop takes on c3, and this is a great move, and I'll show you why. Now, a lot of people look at that and say, I can't give the two bishops. Well, yes, you can. Okay, those two knights are going to have some fun here. White's struggling to get those bishops in the game. Let's just simply play knight f6. Now, how is white going to get d5 in? The answer is he isn't. He's losing a pawn. So that option is forever gone, or at least for a long time gone. How does white get out of this? If you play bishop e3, that's just going to cost you. Okay, here I'll show you. Bishop e3. This rook grabs, the bishop grabs, and we run the rook over here, and hello, looks like we're winning a pawn, and we're going to get an outside pass pawn. So you want to be able to move that bishop. How do you secure h2? Well, you got to guard it with a rook. Okay, rook to e2 shuts this bishop in. Okay, let's try rook d2. Okay, now what should black do? Let's just keep the pressure on. Where can we do that? Well, we can attack a pawn. Whoops, wrong one. We can go attack a pawn if we want. Move the king in. We all got all kinds of interesting candidate moves. Get ready to double on the d file. Maybe get ready to double on the h file. You know, in anticipation of this bishop moving. Oh, there's all kinds of things we can do. If white plays c4 at some point, he's shutting this bishop in again. He's still not going to get d5 in. If he shoves e5, we've got this nice outpost for a knight. This is a position where the two knights are better than the two bishops, and white's not going to be able to open up this position for the bishops to get anywhere. Here, black has the better position, but you have to understand this. Now, it's not winning for black, but who has the winning chances? Is it white or black? Well, it's black. White has nothing going here. Here, we'll look at it. E5. Here, bing, look at that. Nice square for a knight. You want to chase it out? That's fine. I'm going to go find a new square. Here it is. F5. I'm going to pressure D4. You want to stop me from getting in there? Fine. Look at that outpost. You know, you take one square away, I'll find another. That's what knights can do. They'll just drive your opponent nuts. Knights are great pieces. In a closed position, they can wreak more havoc in your opponent's position than two bishops can. And if you learn to use them, you'll have fun with them. I love them. Okay, so that was just an alternative. This was a very interesting game. And again, we don't expect everyone to play perfect. You know, but what we want is to see what you do, see what how you play, and try to make some sense of it all, and see. You know, credit to black for finding the combination. It just had a tactical flaw, and it would require a good think from the position where he played rook c8 to see everything and analyze everything out. That's an art. But by sitting down and moving the pieces afterwards and testing some of these variations and seeing where they go, you know, you can find things. Now let's just play with this for a second. Let's just look at all these wonderful outposts we can get for these knights. I mean, gee wee, look, knight on d5. What's white going to do? Well, let's move his king up. Hey, look at that knight. Knight on f4. What are we going to do next? Well, we're going to find a plan. And it exists, but there's a way to win this. But look at those knights. They're just so lovely. Look at that. It's just a dream come true. Okay, that's enough for this one. I hope it gives Jason some food for thought. I want to thank everyone for taking time to look at this video. And I'll be back soon with another. Okay? Take care. Thanks.